I'll let you grab that. How you going, folks? Good. I planned my weekend really badly. I was out here last night at a party. Can you believe that? Then home to Yanchep, then back out here again. So I've taken out a mortgage and should be all right. About how long ago? My daughter was in first year primary school, and she'd had her first year of primary school down in Denmark on holidays. And we're sitting around the table, just having dinner, and she says, "I know some swear words." I looked at my wife and said, "Oh, all right, okay." I said, "So what swear words do you know?" She said, "I know the but word, I know the shit word, and I know the foot word." That's how I remember where she was at in school. Foot, but, cut. And we said, "Oh, well, tell us, what are the swear words?" She said, "I can't tell you. I'll get in trouble. I can't say them." We said, "No, come on, honey. What about the shirt word? You can tell us that." She says, "I can't say it." So Danelle says, she says the shirt word you're thinking of, right? And Ellie looks at her and goes, "No, what? Hadn't heard that word before." Proud parenting moment. "Oh, tell us, honey. Go on, tell us, what's the shirt word?" She says, "Shut up." "Hope you don't ever say that." No, I don't say that, Dad." "What about the but word?" I said, "Come on, what's the but word?" And she says, "Bum." I'm not feeling so scared about the foot word now. In fact, I'm partially responsible for the foot word. You know what the foot word is, don't you? Fart. Yeah. We go, "Oh, wow. Oh, well, honey, you just don't you be using that bad language around us, you know." We sent her to school to learn some things, and she learned some other things. And, we come to church to learn some things, but we spend our life immersed in a world that teaches us other things. So we come here for a couple of hours a week, and then we go away and we get discipled by the algorithms, the things we see online that tell us how we really ought to live. And, a couple of hours of input in terms of church life doesn't stack up hugely against the amount of time we spend online and in different spaces. So the challenge is to actually align our thinking with the scriptures rather than the stuff we hear around us. This morning we're going to talk about this idea of Sabbath and rest. And again, I use that illustration because I think around us we hear told to us that you need to work hard to get as much money as you can, to buy as much as you can, so you will be as happy as you can. And if that means working 7 days a week, so be it. I don't know how you get to be happy working 7 days a week, but that's the message we sometimes hear around us. Our attitudes to work and where it fits into our life are so easily shaped by our culture rather than by Scripture. So today we jump into this idea of Sabbath. Now, I don't know about you, but sometimes the word can trip you up. Sabbath. I remember as a kid growing up, when I thought of Sabbath, I just thought of things that I wasn't allowed to do. Anyone remember something you weren't allowed to do on the Sabbath? What was it? Go swimming, yeah. Shopping. Watch TV. Do you ever find yourself scratching your head and going, what was the deal with that? For a lot of us, Sabbath brings up pretty negative connotations. So when we talk about Sabbath, all it really means is stop, rest. So if as we talk about it today, you're going, "Oh, I don't know about that," just think stop. Just think rest. That's what we're talking about. So we've been talking about work, and we've been talking about the beauty of work and the fact that God gave us work for a purpose. We've looked at vocation, who God made you to be in this world and where you fit. Last week we looked at mission in the workplace, and we talked about how we live out our faith. We're not about going in and loud and proud. We don't do that in the workplace, but we live it out in a way that people can see. But the challenge is this culture we live in that calls us to this aspirational life that, calls us to keep on doing more and more. And I was talking to a pastor friend recently, and he told me the story of his son coming to him and saying, "Hey, Dad, kids at school, a lot of their dads work FIFO and they go away and they earn heaps of money and they buy them really cool stuff. And they got boats and they got motorbikes and they got all this stuff and, well, you're a pastor. That ain't really working for us." So he's kind of, "Hey, Dad, could you kind of think about a career change, Can you go and make some decent money so we can actually enjoy life a bit?" His dad says, "Well, mate, I'm always around for your athletics carnivals and I get to your assemblies and you see me every night and all that sort of stuff and that's good, eh?" And the kid goes, yeah. This is the pastor telling me the story. He says, "Yeah, okay. He says, "So can we send Mum?" True story. That kid's learnt something somewhere about what really matters in life. It's about having stuff. It's about working hard. So today, if you feel overworked or if you feel like you need a rest, I want to hear that you have permission to rest. Resting isn't weak. Resting isn't weak. Maybe that's all you need to hear today. Resting is a really vital part of a healthy life. What I want to do is show you where this shows up in Scripture, how it plays out, and then we're going to look at some ideas around rest and what shape it takes for us. So if we go to the Bible, we see it's there in Genesis, right at the very start. Seventh day, God rested from all he made, and he made the seventh day holy. I don't think God was tired, but he stopped, and he said, "We're taking a day off." The next time we hear about the Sabbath is in the Ten Commandments, and it's used with the word remember. Because they get the Ten Commandments after they get out of Egypt and after they've been slaves for a really long time. So you can imagine when you're a slave, you don't get a day off. So the whole Sabbath thing just drifts out of your memory, probably out of the collective memory. And God brings it back. He says, hey, remember, you take a day off. And it's a day of rest and it's a day that's holy to me. Make sure you do that. So remember. We hear that in Exodus. Next time we hear it, it's in Deuteronomy and it's the language of observe the Sabbath. So it's now part of the way that the Jewish people live. They observe the Sabbath. It's what they do. Resting is a very godly thing to do. What do we mean by Sabbath? Technically, in that time, it was a 24-hour period, started at sunset, finished at sunset again the next day, and you stopped work. The whole community rested. I can't imagine that today. I don't know if it's even possible today, all right? But the whole community was at rest. You're not allowed to make your animals work. You're not allowed to make your slaves work. Not that, it's a problem for us. But that was the deal. Everybody at rest. And there's a bit of debate around where Sabbath fits into our Christian faith today. Some people take a more one day a week, pretty hard line, kind of need to take a day off view. Other people take a more, it's an idea that we want to build into our lives. And there is literally difference of opinion around that. You might have heard a guy called John Mark Comer. He does a bit of teaching around work and around Sabbath and around that sort of stuff. He's got a great book called Garden City. Sounds like a shopping centre, but it's not. And it's a really, really good book. And he takes quite a strong day approach where they have certain things that they do on the Sabbath day. I take a different approach, and I'll talk a bit more about that a little bit later. So the other approach is Sabbath as a work-rest rhythm. So as we come into the New Testament, we know that the law, the Mosaic law, is no longer applicable. All right? That's not applicable anymore. It's listen to the Spirit. We've been given the Spirit. So if we read passages like Romans chapter 14, one person considers one day more sacred than another. Another considers every day alike. Each of them should be fully convinced in their own mind. So whatever you think about Sabbath, make sure that between you and God you've worked this stuff out and you've got an understanding of what the Spirit is saying to you. If we go to Galatians, Paul's speaking to Christians who've been trapped in the law. And he says, guys, you're observing special days, special seasons and years. I fear that I've wasted my time on you. Strong words. He says, you're free. You don't have to do all that stuff anymore. You're free, but do rest. So on a theological note, you can take this either way. And as we delve into it, you might see why I say that. The thing you can't do is tell people that you must do it this way or my way is superior to your way. So we're going to come and talk about what it looks like in a moment in terms of how Sabbath takes shape. But Sabbath kind of became a dirty word when it got all dumb rules around it. And I feel like Sabbath became about dumb rules and finger waving. You should not and you must do this. I remember a number of years ago we were building a house and we had to lay some tiles. And I'd gone from home to the tile shop that was about 30 kilometres away to pick up the tiles to take them to our new house to get the tile to lay them. And when I got to the shop, they said, okay, how you want to pay? I said, credit card. And then I realised I left my credit card at home. Bummer. 30 k's away. They said, well, you can't take the tiles until you pay with your credit card. I said, it's okay. I know the number because I'd used this credit card so many times. I said, I just give you the number and you can pay that way. They said, we can't do that. I said, why not? I said, I put a deposit down by doing that. He said, no, we can only take credit card over the phone. So I picked up a business card. He said, what are you doing? I said, I'm calling you. It's a dumb rule, eh? Some dumb rules are associated with Sabbath. We're not going to do that. We're going to leave that stuff behind us. In fact, when we see Jesus misbehaving and he's actually critiquing their dumb rules. So when his disciples eat a bit of grain on the Sabbath, he goes, it's a dumb rule. You know, people are hungry. They should be allowed to eat. Not allowed to heal someone on the Sabbath. That's a dumb rule. Really? I think Jesus actually does stuff intentionally to say, don't do dumb things on the Sabbath. Don't put it down to that. So Sabbath is a gift. One of the beauties of the Christian story is that we are not told that we need to just keep working. Our God says, no. You need to stop. You need to rest. You need to have a day when you just chill and you enjoy the day. And as you do that, remember who I am and that I've blessed you with this day. It's a gift. Marva Dawn has written a book called Keeping the Sabbath Holy, WHOLLY. And, if you're not sure how to keep a Sabbath, she says just do this. Figure out what work is for you and don't do it. It's not a bad plan, eh? Figure out what work looks like for you and don't do it. Stop doing that. My wife loves gardening and she will garden on her day off. I hate gardening. So for me, when I go out there to help her, it's usually a chore. It's like she needs me out and I've got to do something. That ain't me having fun. So, I'm going to give you 4 different ways to look at four aspects of the Sabbath. The first one is this one. It's called Sabbath as Resistance. Not my idea. I pinched that from a guy who wrote a book by that title called Walter Brueggemann. And he says, Sabbath is a way in which we say no to the world pushing in us with its way of doing things. I'm going to read you quite a long quote, but I think it's really worth hearing. He says, in our contemporary context of the rat race of anxiety, the celebration of Sabbath is an act of both resistance and alternative. It is resistance because it is a visible insistence that our lives are not defined by the production and consumption of commodity goods. Such an act of resistance requires enormous intentionality and communal reinforcement amid the barrage of seductive pressures from the insatiable insistences of the market with its intrusions into every part of our life, from the family to the national budget. But Sabbath is not only resistance, it is alternative. The alternative on offer is the awareness and practice of the claim that we are situated on the receiving end of the gifts of God. Our God loves us enough that he says, I will care for you in that rest. You are not enslaved by a Pharaoh who is the economic order. You can say no to that. One of the things that happens to me every week is I'm working away and I get a phone call from an O2 number or a landline number, and I pick it up and it's someone who wants to speak to the owner of the business. and they want to tell me how they can improve my website and how they can get me better Google ads and yada, 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 yada. So if I end up talking, I often just say, no, he's not available, he's in jail. And that usually shuts them down pretty quick. But if they want to keep on talking, I let them do the spiel. I've got a spiel. You've got a spiel that says, we can see your website's not ranking very highly, and I'm thinking it is. And you're not doing very well here, and we can help you improve, and you can earn more money, and it'll be very, very successful. And I just let them finish, and they go, okay, would you like to proceed? I said, no, thanks. I said, we can make you more money. We can help you do well. I said, I think I've actually got enough. And there's no script for enough, because no one says that. And you hear them go, but wouldn't you? One guy was really persistent. Surely you want more, so that if you run out, you still have enough. I've already got enough. I've got enough. There's no script for dealing with that. But that's what we're talking about. I could work a lot harder. I could work 7 days a week, but I've got enough. And it's a way of saying, God calls us to a different way of being. Enough. Maybe some of us have to restrain our ambition because we just work late into the night on our projects because we don't feel like we have enough, or we don't feel like God's going to take care of us. When we truly rest, when we choose to say no to the economic machine that drives so much of our lives, then we experience some of the goodness that God speaks of. So Sabbath as resistance. Sabbath as trust. If you're going to take a day off, then you are trusting that either way you will get enough done in the 6 days that you do get to work, or it won't matter and God will provide for you either way. But you're trusting if you take time out that your God is going to look after you. Marva Dawn, again, she says, a great benefit of Sabbath keeping is that we learn to let God take care of us, not by becoming passive and lazy, but in the freedom of giving up our own attempts to be God in our own lives. Letting go of control. When the Hebrew people were wandering in the desert, God provided for them every day. You know the story of the manna and the quail. And he'd say, go out every day, get enough for the day, and then go back in and you'll be good. But on the day before Sabbath, get twice as much because there ain't going to be out there on the Sabbath. And as we do, a bunch of people went out on the Sabbath and went, there's nothing here. He said, no, I told you that because I'm going to provide enough by providing twice as much for you the day before. But every day they had enough. What does enough look like for you? I had this conversation with my friend yesterday who's growing a business. And he reckons 10 million is enough. His wife reckons 100 million is enough. Oh, to think of such figures. Crikey. But I remember coming back from our first trip around Australia. And it was 2009, just after the GFC. And we'd made some good money in the time before there. And we'd paid our house off and we had some money in the bank. So we invested some money while we were travelling, thinking we'll make another 100,000 while we're travelling. And what actually ended up happening was we lost $250,000. Boom. We went from having no mortgage to having a house worth $500,000 and a $250,000 mortgage on it. More than we'd ever owed, which it sounds $250,000 just sounds like chicken feed these days. I know, but it was a lot to us back then. And I came back to this little retic business that I had to get off the ground, and we really needed to get rolling to get this debt paid off. And I'd be at church on Sunday and you'd see a phone call come in and you'd think, I've made a commitment not to take phone calls on Sunday. But I just wonder if this could be another job that I really, really need, So it was actually a real discipline to let it go through to the keeper and hope that come Monday I could call them back. Because a lot of people just keep trying tradies on a Sunday and eventually you get someone who answers their phone. But it was a discipline to say, I can trust the God who provides that there will be enough on Monday. What does that look like for you? Paul says to Timothy, but godliness with contentment is great gain. For we brought nothing into the world, we can take nothing out of it, but if we have food and clothing, we'll be content with that. We won't. Let's be honest, we won't. We look around and we see things that we want. After our second trip around Australia, we're driving back into Yanchep, literally, and parked just right down by the beach was my old GQ Patrol. This was the car we drove around Australia the first time in. And I loved that car. And I'd sold it to another guy in Yanchep who'd sold it on to another guy. And as we drove past it, I saw a for sale sign on it. I said to my wife, I'm buying that. She said, no, you're not. We're only about 2 minutes from home, and I thought, I'm buying it. Anyway, we went home and unpacked, did all the stuff, and I'd taken a photo of the for sale sign. So I rang the guy. I said, I think I should come and drive the car. He knew who I was. I said, oh, you Stone, I'd love to buy it back. I didn't tell the Nell this. I thought I'll just go and have a sniff. And I know you shouldn't do that, but I did. And I went and drove the car, and you know, it was a 1996 car. When you've driven a 2025 car and you hop back in a 1996 car, I'd forgotten what this thing felt like. And I just had these romantic memories of this car being awesome and incredible, wonderful. And the windows didn't work and the fuel gauge didn't work and the other people hadn't looked after it. It was tatty. It used to be in immaculate condition. So I brought it home and said, oh, look, mate, I don't think I'm going to buy it. Thanks very much. And I went home, I said to Nell, oh, look, I don't think I'm going to buy the car. She said, well, you were never going to buy that car. I said, right, and then she says to me, but you know what you've just told me? You've just told me you've got $10,000 to spend on a toy. Thinking maybe she's going to let me buy a boat. No. Danelle's been working in orphanages in Bali, and she pulls out this photo of the bus that the Bali orphanages are using. And it looks like something you'd find abandoned out the back of Two Rocks. You know, the seats are torn and it's rusted through and it's disgusting. She says, these guys need a new van. It's about $12,000. Maybe we can chuck in the 10 and we see the church can find some more. What do you think? Awesome. Because we got enough and we can trust that God will provide for us. We should be content. So we bought a van. Really excited to have that van for other people. But you get the picture, eh? You know, it's just so easy. You can't see something and you want it, and we just do it. Third thing, Sabbath as rhythm. So I used to drive old cars and fix them up as they went. And then in 2015, I bought a brand new car, first time ever. First time I ever owned a car that was made in the same decade in which we're living. So I was quite excited about that. And with a brand new car, you realise that every 15,000 Ks, this thing needs servicing. And if you don't do that, imagine you went to buy a car that was 4 years old, had done 200,000 kilometres, and had never been serviced. You wouldn't touch it, would you? Because you think this thing's just a ticking time bomb. It's just going to blow up. Well, it's exactly the same with us. We need that regular servicing. God says a 6-to-1 ratio is kind of the thing you should be going for. Have 6 days on, 1 day off. Now, that's more of a rhythm than a thing that you need to stick to. The reason I say that, because I can't imagine a whole community at rest, because the way in which we live these days, it just isn't practical to say, everybody, 6 days on, 1 day off. If you're a shift worker, if you're a nurse, if you're a cop, if you're a FIFO worker, you know, those things don't work. So we need to think more about how do we practically do rest in this culture, in this time. You know, I think about how Jesus spoke about other aspects of the law. In the Sermon on the Mount, you know, he says, you've heard it said, don't commit adultery. But I say to you, don't lust. I've heard it said, don't commit murder. But I say to you, don't even hate someone in your heart. It's like on each thing, he raises the bar and he says, I want you to do this differently. He doesn't say anything about Sabbath in there. But I wonder what he'd say about Sabbath if he said, you've heard it said, keep the Sabbath. But I say to you, what might he say? I reckon he might say, but I say to you, rest is found in me and learning my way to live. So when I say 6 and 1, I think that's a rhythm. Probably 6 weeks on, 1 week off ain't a real healthy rhythm either, all right? So that's the kind of a rhythm we ought to think of. Let each person work out the rhythm for themselves and their family, as perhaps Romans or Galatians would suggest we can do. Finally, Sabbath as a life. Hebrews 4 is a pretty complex piece of scripture, but it speaks of entering rest in Jesus. It says, there remains then a Sabbath rest for the people of God. For anyone who enters God's rest also rests from their works just as God did from his. Let us therefore make every effort to enter that rest so that no one will perish by following an example of disobedience. So when Jesus says, come to me, all you who are weighed down by life, you're weary and I'll give you rest, he's speaking of a life centred on him that is no longer driven by religious obligations, oughts and shoulds. Jesus calls us to rest in him as a way of life, and that is rich and that is beautiful. That doesn't mean we don't work hard or that we shouldn't pursue being successful, but it's referring to a posture with which we engage our work. A few years back at our Baptist Pastors Conference, we had this theme of returning to the well. That was the theme for the pastors, and a couple of guys were making a little video thing, as you do for some of these things, and they said, can we come and talk to you about how you return to the well, what it looks like for you? Anyway, the guys come up and they started making this video, and they asked me the question, so how do you return to the well? And I said something that later I thought, wow, that is profound. I said, I don't think we return to the well anymore. I think we live by the well. And as I said that, I thought, wow, that's probably true of our life, but that's beautiful. I thought, I don't want to sound like I'm egotistical, I want to blow my own trumpet, but I thought I had an insight there. I thought that is how I want to live. Live by the well so that we're always around Jesus, so we're always listening to him. Funny thing was, they cut it and didn't use it. I thought it was the best thing I said all day, but they didn't use it. But it made an impression on me. When we go to work and live from a place of rest in Jesus, we know that 6 and 1 doesn't mean you go flat out, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. every day, and then go, all right, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about living in such a way that there is space in our lives, a complete reconfiguration of our life in light of who Jesus is and how he calls us to live. Means we move through life spaciously and thoughtfully. And literally this week I was fixing a diesel heater in a caravan, and a little gauze filter got stuck in a port, and I couldn't get it out. And the owner had said, look, I won't take off. Normally I tell people unhitch and go away and leave me to work. And he said, no, I'll just hang around. I thought, oh, awesome. You know that sign that says, if you help, if you watch, if you've tried to work on it yourself, price goes up. But anyway, I was struggling with this thing, and he wanted to come in and help me, and I'm feeling frustrated and annoyed by this. And his wife, who's probably mid-80s, toddles up the driveway with the walking sticks. Have you got a toilet? Yeah, there's one in our house. And anyway, I'm feeling frustrated, and I walk up to get a drink of water, and there's my wife sitting there with a cup of tea with this lady. And it's just one of those moments where you go, I need to do life more like that than just getting uptight because I can't get a filter out of a port. Living spaciously, I was off track, she was on track. What's it look like for you to live so that Jesus is the centre of life and so that Sabbath becomes a way of life? I think Jesus had regular rhythms. I think he probably practiced the Sabbath as a Jewish person would. But I don't think he was bound by it. I love seeing Jesus, after he's had a hard day of ministry, get in a boat and go across to the lake, to the other side, to get away from the people. It's like, I need to decompress. He gets over there. This is in Matthew 14. He gets over there and they find him. And he doesn't go, no, done for the day, go away. He just goes, all right, let's do it again. He's able to go, all right, I can work a bit harder for a while and I can rest another time. So it's not rigid. You get it? We went to Bali on a holiday last year and I was going over there to do a wedding. So it was kind of work, kind of rest because we were having a bit of a surfing holiday in Nusa Lembongan. And then I had a sermon to prepare coming back. You know the best part of that holiday? It was preparing the sermon because it was really, really enjoyable. I really enjoyed the reading. Surfing is really hard because I'm 61 and there's a bunch of 20-year-old guys in the water. But, that was the best part. Were we resting? Were we holidaying? Were we working? Yeah, we were. We were. All of the above. So when we were younger, we actually had this practice of having a very firm day off because our lives were much busier. And we said, we need to actually choose a day and say, we're going to stop here. We're not so busy now. We're in that sort of more semi-retired phase of life where you can work as hard as you like. You don't have to do anything if you don't want to. So we're able to work with a better rhythm. So maybe you need to look at your life and go, where are we at? Is time tight? Maybe we need to create definite space. One of the last thoughts, it was Brueggemann who also said this. He talked about the fact that Sabbath happens in community. It's really hard to practice a Sabbath if people around you aren't doing it. He says this, I think you've got to have a community around you that supports you. How do you tell your kid that he can't go to soccer practice on Sunday morning because it's a Sabbath? You can't, unless you've got a number of other families telling their kids that they can't go to soccer practices too. The pressure of market ideology makes it almost impossible for a single person or single family to do this unless you're in a community that's generally supportive of it. It's not about Sunday sport, okay? It's not about that. But it's about the things that we commit to. If we commit to them individually and no one else does, that can become really, really tricky. So it's important as a community we agree that this is important for us. You can work out your Sunday sport things on your own. That's a whole different question. When we live a life that is beautiful to others, that is at peace, and that is spacious, I think it's probably inspiring to other people. I think it's the sort of life that people look at and go, you're doing something right. You look like you've got space in your life. You look like you're enjoying your life. You're not flat out. If you're flat out, I want to encourage you to just go, what can I do differently? How can I bring real rest to my days? And actually rest not just to kind of kick back and watch Netflix, but rest to breathe, rest to do things that bring you joy, rest to connect with God. So we've talked about the work you do. I want to encourage you to enjoy your work, whether you are working full-time in a job, whether you're retired and what you're doing is voluntary, whether you're staying at home with your kids, you're working. Be grateful for it. Do your job as Jesus would. We've talked about vocation, discerning who God calls you to be. What is your unique and special contribution you make to the world, to this community? We talked about living out your faith graciously and humbly in the workplace so that people's curiosity may be stirred. And lastly, we talked about prioritising rest, a life that is beautiful, not in its acquisitions, but in its simplicity and its joy and its hospitality. Let me pray. Father, I thank you again for this community of people who live around here, who work, some of them around here, some of them downtown, but as we go out tomorrow, we go back to our workplaces all over the city and we are your people right out there. We're going to spend our days out there. So I want to pray that we would be equipped and encouraged and aware of what you want to do in our workplaces through us and through the people we connect with. We pray that in your name. Amen.
Now, we've had Andrew up for 4 weeks. Have we appreciated that? Absolutely, mate. And I think...
Glad the answer was yes.
I think that was a yes. You got a book coming out?
Yeah.
So I think when Andrew puts his book out, let's find out. So if people want to grab that, we might be able to get some copies up here so people can... Much of this stuff in there?
Yeah, well, actually, these 4 messages are kind of made 4 chapters, and there's another 5 or 6 chapters. It's called High Vis Faith, kind of for practical people who kind of do things, and want to. And it's going to be an audio book too, so it's kind of simple to listen to. Yeah.
Yep. Okay, so when that comes out, we'll let you know. And so if you want to grab some copies, might get some up here. Thank you. Andrew's got to come a fair way. I had a look on the GPS of how far Yanchep was. I won't tell you, but it's a fair way.
It's a nice drive.
Now, people thought really seriously about what gift could we give Andrew? We thought we'd have something for Danelle as well.
Oh, good on you.
And I don't know whether there's any significance in this, but we thought soap.
Soap.
Made in the Hills soap.
Awesome.
It's got a men's fragrance in one and a women's fragrance in the other.
Awesome.
Go for it, mate.
Thanks,
Andrew. Bless you, mate.
Thanks, guys.